The ancient chamber hummed with the soft glow of crystalline formations that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. Elder stood before the cosmic archive, his elongated fingers tracing patterns of light that danced across the translucent walls. The prophecy had been carved into these very crystals eons ago, when his people first learned to read the threads of time itself. "The young ones approach the threshold," whispered Elder, her voice carrying the weight of. Her silver robes rustled as she moved closer to the viewing portal, where distant stars twinkled like scattered diamonds. "The species they call themselves, humans have achieved faster than light travel." Nodded slowly, his ancient eyes reflecting concern. The collective had been watching this particular species for over 2,000 of their years, ever since their first radio signals had reached the outer monitoring stations. What they had observed, every pattern they had documented in their extensive galactic database. "Show me their latest conflict," commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber. The crystalline walls shimmered and transformed into a three-dimensional display of a blue-green world. Earth. The humans were engaged in what they called a world war, their second global conflict in less than a century. The elders watched as primitive flying machines dropped explosive devices on cities, as millions of individuals fought with weapons that would have been considered toys by galactic standards. "Look at the destruction they inflict upon themselves," observed, her voice tinged with something between fascination and horror. "Yet observe how they rebuild, how they adapt, how they refuse to surrender even when facing impossible odds." The display shifted to show a small island nation standing alone against a massive military machine. Cities burned under relentless bombardment, yet the population continued to resist. Children were evacuated to the countryside while adults remained to fight with whatever weapons they could find. When their advanced fighter aircraft were depleted, they sent up obsolete planes piloted by elderly men. When their ships were sunk, they used fishing boats to rescue survivors. "This behavior contradicts the Galactic Pacification Protocol," Elder Vox interjected, his mechanical voice emanating from a tall, spider-like form. The Vox had joined the collective after their own had been absorbed 3 ago. "Standard doctrine suggests that any species facing a force 10 times their strength should surrender within 7 rotations to preserve their population." Manipulated the display to show another scene. A city under siege, its defenders outnumbered 50 to 1. Instead of surrendering, the human defenders had turned every building into a fortress, every street into a battlefield. They fought with rifles when they had them, with improvised weapons when they didn't, and with their bare hands when everything else was gone. "The prophecy speaks of a species that would emerge from the third spiral arm," recited, her voice taking on the formal cadence of ancient ritual. "They would be neither the strongest nor the fastest, neither the most intelligent nor the most technologically advanced. Yet they would possess something that would make them unconquerable. The prophecy called it the flame that refuses to die." The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of the crystals. The elders had seen this prophecy proven true countless times throughout their observations of humanity. During their plagues, humans would work tirelessly to save each other, often sacrificing their own lives for strangers. During their natural disasters, they would run into burning buildings and collapsing structures to rescue others. During their wars, they would charge into certain death to protect their comrades. "But surely," Vox's mechanical voice cut through the silence, "when they encounter the reality of galactic civilization, when they see our vast fleets and advanced technology, they will understand their position. They will accept their place in the collective as all others have done." Elder turned away from the display, his expression troubled. He had lived through the integration of over 200 species into the collective. Each had followed the same pattern: initial resistance, demonstration of superior force, negotiation, and finally peaceful absorption. The process was as predictable as the movement of celestial bodies. Yet the humans showed patterns that broke every model. Their history was filled with examples of individuals and small groups standing against overwhelming odds, not for personal gain, but for abstract concepts they called freedom, justice, and honor. They would fight wars for generations, passing the conflict from parents to children like a sacred trust. "Observe their children," said, manipulating the display to show human younglings at play. "Even their games center around conflict and competition. They simulate warfare with toy soldiers. They create elaborate scenarios where small groups fight against larger forces. Their entertainment focuses on stories of individuals who refuse to submit to authority. The display showed various forms of human art and entertainment. Movies where single individuals fought against entire armies. Books where small groups of rebels battled vast empires. Songs that celebrated defiance and resistance. Even their sports involved direct physical competition, with audiences cheering for underdogs who refused to give up despite being outmatched. Their neural patterns show something unique, Vox observed, accessing data from covert observation missions. When faced with overwhelming odds, instead of the fear and submission responses we see in other species, they exhibit increased activity in regions associated with determination and aggression. It's as if the hopelessness of their situation actually strengthens their resolve. Move to another section of the chamber, where historical records of the collective's expansion were stored. The pattern had always been the same. First contact was made with impressive displays of technological superiority. The target species would initially resist, but careful application of force and demonstration of the futility of opposition would bring them to negotiations. Terms would be agreed upon, and the species would be peacefully integrated into the collective, adding their unique knowledge and capabilities to the greater whole. Perhaps, suggested Elder, the humans will be different only in the duration of their resistance. All species eventually see reason when faced with the mathematical certainty of defeat. But wasn't convinced. He called up records of humanity's responses to their own internal conflicts. Time after time, when faced with technologically superior opponents, humans had found ways to continue fighting. They would adapt their tactics, use unconventional weapons, and exploit weaknesses their enemies didn't know they had. The display showed a small group of farmers and merchants who had fought the most powerful military force on their planet, and won. It showed colonial populations who had defeated professional armies using guerrilla tactics. It showed resistance movements that had operated in occupied territories for years, fighting enemies who controlled all the major cities and transportation networks. "There's something else," said quietly. "The prophecy speaks of more than just their refusal to surrender. It warns that this species would not merely resist absorption into the collective. It suggests that their very existence would change the nature of galactic civilization itself." The other elders fell silent. The prophecy was ancient, created by the first generation of who had developed the ability to glimpse potential futures. It had proven accurate in every detail so far, predicting the rise of the collective, the peaceful integration of hundreds of worlds, and the long era of stability they now enjoyed. But the prophecy also spoke of an end to that stability. A species that would emerge and challenge not just the collective's authority, but its very philosophy of inevitable peaceful absorption. A species that would spread their unusual characteristics to others, creating a galaxy where resistance and rebellion became common rather than rare anomalies. "We must proceed with first contact," Elder Vox declared. "The longer we delay, the more their technology advances. Already they have achieved basic faster-than-light communication. Their first interstellar vessels will be operational within 50 of their years." Nodded reluctantly. The collective's protocols were clear. Any species that achieved interstellar capability needed to be contacted and integrated before they could spread beyond their home system. Uncontrolled expansion had led to devastating wars in the galaxy's past, wars that had nearly destroyed all intelligent life. "Prepare the first contact fleet," he commanded. "Standard formation enough ships to demonstrate our technological superiority without appearing overtly threatening. We'll begin with the usual cultural exchange protocols." As the elders dispersed to make preparations, remained in the chamber, staring at the display that still showed Earth turning slowly in the darkness of space. The humans continued their daily activities, unaware that their future was being decided by beings they had never encountered. The prophecy echoed in his mind. They will not be defeated, for they carry within themselves something that cannot be conquered by force, cannot be negotiated away, and cannot be destroyed. And in their refusal to yield, they will awaken this same flame in others. Deactivated the display and walked toward the chamber's exit. The collective had maintained peace and stability across the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Their methods were proven, their success undeniable. Surely one small species from an unremarkable star system could not change the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Yet as he left the chamber, the elder couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The humans were coming, and despite all their advanced technology, all their accumulated wisdom, and all their careful preparation, the collective was not ready for what was about to unfold. The first ships of the contact fleet began their journey toward the Sol system, their crews confident in their mission and certain of its outcome. Behind them, in the crystal chambers of Prime, ancient prophecies pulsed with renewed energy, as if responding to the approach of their fulfillment. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, billions of beings continued their lives in peaceful submission to the greater good of the collective, unaware that somewhere in a small corner of space, a species existed that had never learned to submit and never would. The massive collective fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, their sleek vessels catching the distant light of Earth's sun. Admiral stood on the bridge of the flagship, a kilometer-long dreadnought that had participated in the peaceful integration of 47 different species. Around him, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, their various forms representing a dozen different worlds that had joined the collective over the past 3. Sensors detect significant activity around the third planet, reported Lieutenant, her crystalline form refracting the bridge lighting into dancing rainbows. The humans have established orbital installations and appear to have a substantial space-based infrastructure. Admiral nodded, studying the tactical display with interest. In the 50 years since the Elders had first authorized this mission, the humans had made remarkable progress. They had established permanent settlements on their moon, built massive space stations in orbit around there, and developed what appeared to be a substantial space-based military fleet. Their technological advancement rate exceeds all previous models, observed Commander Vex, the ship's science officer. At their current pace, they will achieve our level of technology within 2 centuries rather than the predicted 5. The Admiral wasn't surprised. Every species the collective had encountered showed similar patterns once they achieved basic space flight. The challenges of operating in the vacuum of space and traveling between worlds drove rapid technological advancement. What did surprise him was the scale of their development. "How many vessels are we detecting?" he asked. "Over 3,000 military ships," reported, ranging from small patrol craft to vessels nearly as large as our destroyers. They also have extensive defensive platforms throughout their system. Frowned, most species had a few dozen ships when the collective made first contact. The humans had built what appeared to be a substantial military force, despite having no knowledge of other spacefaring civilizations. It suggested either extreme paranoia or remarkable foresight. "Open a communication channel," the Admiral ordered. "Standard first contact protocols." The main display shifted to show Earth growing larger as their message traveled toward the human. According to their intelligence, the humans had developed sophisticated communication networks and should be able to receive and decode their transmission within minutes. The response came faster than expected. "Unknown vessels, this is United Earth Defense Command. You have entered sovereign human territory without permission. State your intentions immediately or you will be considered hostile." The bridge fell silent. In over 3,000 years of first contact operations, no species had ever opened communications with a demand. Most were either awed by the obvious technological superiority of the collective fleet or confused by the sudden appearance of alien vessels. Admiral activated the communication system personally. "This is Admiral of the collective. We come in peace to establish diplomatic relations with your species. We request permission to approach your world for cultural exchange." The response came back within minutes, but it wasn't what anyone expected. "Admiral, this is General Sarah Martinez, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense. We appreciate your stated peaceful intentions. However, we require a full briefing on your civilization, your intentions regarding humanity, and your expectations for this cultural exchange before any approach to Earth will be authorized." Commander Vex looked up from his station with obvious confusion. "Admiral, they're treating us as equals rather than recognizing our superior position. This behavior is unprecedented." Study the tactical display more carefully. The human fleet had shifted into what was clearly a defensive formation, positioning their larger vessels between the collective fleet and Earth. It wasn't an overtly hostile arrangement, but it was unmistakably military in nature. "General Martinez," the Admiral continued, "we understand your caution. The collective is a peaceful alliance of over 300 species spread across this galaxy. Our purpose is to bring new civilizations into our community for mutual benefit and galactic stability. This time the response took longer, and when it came, the tone had changed significantly. Admiral, we need to discuss this in detail. I'm dispatching a diplomatic vessel to meet with you at the edge of our system. Ambassador will be authorized to conduct preliminary negotiations. Within hours, a sleek human vessel approached the collective fleet. It was smaller than their smallest escort, but its design was unlike anything they had encountered. Where collective ships were smooth and flowing, the human vessel was angular and aggressive-looking, with obvious weapon ports and heavy armor plating. The human delegation that came aboard was equally surprising. Ambassador was a middle-aged woman who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to difficult negotiations. She was accompanied by a military escort and what appeared to be a team of scientists and analysts. "Welcome aboard," Admiral said, gesturing to the prepared meeting chamber. "We're pleased to begin formal diplomatic contact." Ambassador smiled, but her eyes remained alert and calculating. "Thank you, Admiral. Before we begin, I have some questions about this collective you represent." For the next several hours, the ambassador asked detailed questions about the collective's structure, its methods of expansion, and its treatment of member species. Her inquiries were sharp and penetrating, focusing particularly on how species were integrated and what happened to those who preferred to maintain their independence. "So let me understand this correctly," said after reviewing the information provided. "Your collective encompasses 300 species, all of whom have peacefully joined your alliance after being contacted by your fleets." "That is correct," Admiral confirmed. "The benefits of joining our community far outweigh any perceived advantages of maintaining isolation." "And what happens to species that prefer to maintain their independence?" The Admiral hesitated. In truth, no species had ever been permitted to remain completely independent after contact. The galaxy was too dangerous, and uncontrolled expansion too risky. But the standard integration process was genuinely peaceful, offering significant benefits in exchange for accepting collective authority. "All species eventually recognize the advantages of membership," he said carefully. Ambassador's expression didn't change, but Admiral got the distinct impression that his answer had been noted and filed away for future reference. "I see. And what exactly would membership in the collective mean for humanity?" Activated a holographic display showing the benefits of collective membership. Advanced technology, access to galactic trade networks, protection from hostile forces, and integration into a stable, peaceful civilization that had eliminated poverty, disease, and warfare. "It sounds wonderful," said politely, "but I notice you haven't mentioned what humanity would be expected to contribute in return." "Each species contributes according to their abilities," the Admiral explained. "Some provide technological innovations, others offer unique cultural perspectives or natural resources. All contribute to the security and stability of the collective through integration of their military forces with our defense fleet." "I see. And what if a species prefers to contribute while maintaining its sovereignty?" Again, Admiral hesitated. The question showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how the collective operated. Sovereignty was an outdated concept that led to conflict and instability. All successful galactic civilizations eventually learned to subordinate individual desires to collective good. "Sovereignty is a primitive concept that leads to conflict," he explained gently. "The collective provides a framework for peaceful coexistence that benefits everyone." Ambassador nodded thoughtfully. "Admiral, I need to consult with my government about these discussions. Would it be possible to arrange a temporary ceasefire while we consider our options?" The request was so unexpected that almost laughed. "Ambassador, we're not at war. This is a peaceful first contact mission." "Of course," replied smoothly. "But given that you've made it clear that joining your collective isn't optional, and that you don't recognize the legitimacy of national sovereignty, I think it's accurate to say that we're discussing the terms of humanity's surrender rather than genuine diplomatic alternatives." The bluntness of her statement left the Admiral speechless. No species had ever characterized the integration process as surrender before. Most were grateful for the opportunity to join galactic civilization. "We should return to our ship," continued, standing up. "We'll need time to discuss this with our leadership and prepare our response." As the human delegation prepared to leave, Ambassador paused at the airlock. "Admiral, you might want to review your intelligence about human history. We have extensive experience dealing with entities that demand surrender in exchange for protection. It's never worked out well for the entities making those demands." After the humans departed, Admiral found himself reviewing their historical databases with new attention. The species had an unusually violent history, but what stood out wasn't the violence itself. Many species had violent pasts. What was unusual was the consistent pattern of smaller groups successfully resisting larger, more powerful forces. Commander Vex approached his command station with obvious concern. "Admiral, our long-range sensors are detecting significant movement throughout their system. They appear to be mobilizing their entire fleet and activating all defensive installations. How long before they could launch an attack on our position? Their fastest vessels could reach us within 18 hours if they chose to do so." Admiral studied the tactical display, noting the positioning of human forces. They weren't preparing to surrender or negotiate from weakness. They were preparing to fight. "Send a message to the collective high command," he ordered. "Request additional forces and authorization to proceed with advanced integration protocols if necessary." As the communication traveled towards space, Admiral wondered if the ancient prophecy was beginning to unfold. The humans weren't reacting like any species the collective had encountered before. They weren't awed by superior technology, they weren't intimidated by vast numbers, and they certainly weren't grateful for the opportunity to join galactic civilization. Instead, they seemed to be treating the collective as just another enemy to be resisted, another threat to be overcome. And judging from their history, they had considerable experience in both resistance and overcoming threats. On Earth, emergency sessions of the United Nations were taking place around the clock. The revelation that humanity was not alone in the universe had been shocking enough. The discovery that they were expected to surrender their independence to a galactic empire was entirely unacceptable. General Martinez stood before the assembled leaders of Earth's nations, her expression grim but determined. "Ladies, we're facing a situation unlike anything in human history, but we've faced impossible odds before and we've survived. We'll survive this too." The room erupted in heated discussion as delegates debated options ranging from immediate negotiation to total war. But gradually, a consensus emerged. Humanity had fought too long and too hard for its freedom to surrender it to aliens, no matter how advanced they might be. The message that went back to Admiral was brief and unambiguous. "The United Nations of Earth thanks the collective for their offer of membership. We respectfully decline. We look forward to establishing trade and diplomatic relations between our sovereign civilizations." When Admiral received the message, he realized that everything the elders had feared was about to come true. The prophecy was unfolding exactly as predicted, and there was nothing the collective could do to stop it. The humans had done something no species had done in over 3,000 years. They had said no. The Battle of Sol began at 3:47 hours, Earth Standard Time, when Admiral received authorization from the collective high command to proceed with advanced integration protocols. The massive reinforcement fleet that had been traveling toward human space for 3 months dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, bringing the total collective force to over 2,000 vessels. Admiral stood on his bridge, watching as the human defense fleet moved to intercept positions. The disparity in numbers was overwhelming, nearly 6-1 in favor of the collective. The technological advantage was even greater. Collective ships were equipped with energy shields that could absorb tremendous damage, weapons that could destroy planets, and faster-than-light capabilities that should have made human resistance impossible. "Admiral," reported Commander Vex, "the humans are transmitting on all frequencies. It appears to be some kind of message to their entire population." "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge belonged to President Maria Santos of the United Nations. Her words were calm, but carried an unmistakable steel underneath. "Citizens of Earth, we face today an enemy that demands our surrender, our freedom, and our future. They offer us peace in exchange for everything that makes us human. They promise security in exchange for our sovereignty. They guarantee prosperity in exchange for our children's birthright. To this, we say what humans have always said: when faced with such demands, we refuse." Admiral listened with growing unease. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, appealed for mercy or attempted to negotiate better terms. The human leader was doing something entirely different. She was inspiring her people to fight a battle they couldn't possibly win. Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for the principle that intelligent beings have the right to determine their own destiny. We fight for the idea that freedom is worth any price. We fight because surrender is not in our nature, and we will not be the generation that teaches our children that resistance is futile. The transmission ended, and an eerie silence fell over the bridge. In the tactical display, the human fleet was spreading out into small groups, abandoning the traditional formation that might have allowed them to concentrate their limited firepower. Their tactical deployment makes no sense, Commander Vex observed. They're dividing their forces against a superior enemy. But Admiral was beginning to understand. The humans weren't trying to win a traditional naval engagement. They were implementing something from their own military history, guerrilla warfare adapted for space combat. The first phase of the battle went exactly as predicted. Collective forces advanced in overwhelming strength, and human defenders were systematically destroyed. But instead of breaking and running, each human ship fought until it was completely disabled, often ramming collective vessels when their weapons were exhausted. "Admiral," came an urgent report from the communications officer, "we're receiving distress signals from Outpost 442. They're under attack by human forces." The tactical display expanded to show the broader situation. While the main collective fleet was engaged at Sol, small human task forces had somehow penetrated deep into collective space and were attacking isolated outposts and supply lines. "That's impossible," Commander Vex protested. "We have sensor networks monitoring all approaches to collective space." But the reports kept coming. Human ships were appearing throughout the outer territories, attacking supply convoys and isolated installations before disappearing back into the void. Their faster-than-light technology was somehow different from anything the collective had encountered, less sophisticated, but apparently much harder to detect. "Sir," another report came in, "we're receiving a message from the human Admiral Sarah. She's requesting a parley." Admiral found himself facing the same woman who had negotiated during first contact. But now, she appeared on screen in full military uniform against the backdrop of what was clearly a military command center. "Admiral," she said without preamble, "I wanted to personally inform you that you've made a serious mistake." "Admiral," replied formally, "your position is hopeless. Surrender now, and your species will be treated with the dignity accorded to all collective members." Smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Admiral, you've spent 3,000 years dealing with species that had never encountered anything like your collective. We've spent our entire history dealing with entities exactly like your collective. Empires that demanded submission. Conquerors who offered protection in exchange for freedom. Bullies who confused superior technology with inevitable victory." The display behind her lit up with a strategic overview that made Admiral's blood run cold. Human forces weren't just attacking random targets. They were systematically destroying the infrastructure that held the collective together. Communication relays, supply depots, administrative centers, and transportation hubs throughout a dozen star systems were either under attack or already destroyed. "You see, Admiral, you made the same mistake that every empire in human history has made. You assumed that because you could win battles, you would win the war. But wars aren't won by destroying armies. They're won by destroying the will to fight. And you've just demonstrated to 300 species that the mighty collective can be successfully resisted." As if to emphasize her point, reports began flooding in from across collective space. On Prime, the local population had risen in rebellion against their collective governors. On 186B, mining operations had shut down as workers refused to report to their posts. On dozens of worlds that had been peaceful for centuries, populations were demanding the right to govern themselves. "This is impossible," Commander Vex whispered, studying the incoming reports. "These species have been loyal collective members for—" But Admiral had heard him. "Commander, you've spent so long in a galaxy where everyone accepted that resistance was futile that you forgot something important. Resistance is never futile. It just requires someone willing to pay the price. And humans have always been willing to pay any price for freedom." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. While the collective was achieving its objectives in the Sol system, human military forces were being systematically destroyed. The cost was becoming astronomical. More importantly, the very act of resistance was spreading throughout collective space like a virus. "Admiral," came an urgent transmission from Elder himself, "you must cease military operations immediately. The situation in collective space is approaching complete breakdown." Admiral looked at the strategic display showing the scope of the rebellions. Entire sectors were effectively lost to collective control, with local populations either in open revolt or simply refusing to acknowledge collective authority. "Elder," he transmitted back, "if we cease operations now, the humans will claim victory. Every species in the galaxy will learn that the collective can be defeated." "Admiral," Elder replied grimly, "they have already learned that lesson. The question now is whether we can salvage any kind of stable relationship with humanity before our entire civilization collapses." The irony wasn't lost on Admiral. The collective had sought to integrate humanity to prevent the spread of their dangerous ideas about independence and resistance. Instead, the very act of trying to conquer them had spread those ideas faster and more effectively than any human missionary could have managed. "Admiral," he said, reopening communications with the human commander, "what are your terms for ceasefire?" "Simple," she replied immediately. "Immediate withdrawal of all collective forces from Sol system, recognition of human sovereignty over all human-controlled space, and establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the United Nations of Earth and the collective as equal sovereign entities." "And the rebellions in collective space?" Admiral's expression became serious. "Admiral, those populations are making their own choices about their own futures. We're not directing their actions, and we won't take responsibility for them. But we also won't abandon peoples who are fighting for the same principles we defend." Admiral realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The careful order that the collective had maintained for was crumbling, not because of military defeat, but because of the simple example of one species refusing to accept that resistance was futile. "I'll need to consult with the High Command," he said finally. "Of course," replied. "But Admiral, you should know that we've already transmitted our story throughout this region of the galaxy. Every species within 50 light-years now knows that humans said no to the collective and survived. That message is going to keep spreading whether you withdraw now or continue fighting." As the communication ended, Admiral found himself facing a choice no collective commander had ever confronted. He could continue the military operation and probably succeed in conquering humanity, but the cost would be the destruction of the very civilization he served. Or he could accept the first military defeat in collective history and try to adapt to a galaxy where species could choose their own destinies. The decision came from the Elder Council within hours. The collective fleet was ordered to withdraw from Sol's system immediately. Formal diplomatic recognition was extended to the United Nations of Earth, and emergency negotiations were authorized to address the spreading rebellions throughout collective space. As the massive fleet prepared for departure, Admiral received one final message from Admiral. "Admiral, humanity doesn't want to destroy the collective. We want to change it. Your civilization has accomplished remarkable things. You've created peace, prosperity, and stability on a galactic scale. But you've done it by denying people the right to choose their own path. We believe those same benefits can be achieved while preserving the freedom that makes life worth living." Months later, as negotiators from dozens of species gathered on the neutral world of 438b to establish new frameworks for galactic governance, Elder stood once again in the crystal chamber where this had all begun. The prophecy had been fulfilled in ways no one had anticipated. Humanity had not been defeated because they possessed something that couldn't be conquered: the absolute refusal to accept that any challenge was insurmountable. And in their refusal to yield, they had indeed awakened that same flame in others across the galaxy. But perhaps most remarkably, they had proven that the choice wasn't between order and chaos, between peace and war, between civilization and barbarism. The choice was between a galaxy where people submitted to authority because they had no alternative, and a galaxy where they chose cooperation because they believed it served their interests. The new galactic federation that emerged from those negotiations was smaller than the old collective. Many species chose independence over membership in any galactic government. But it was also stronger. because its members participated voluntarily, knowing they could leave if the relationship no longer served their needs. Elder smiled as he watched the proceedings on his crystal display. The humans had been right about one thing: resistance was never futile. And perhaps, he thought, a galaxy where resistance was possible was a better place than one where it was merely unnecessary. In the Sol system, Earth continued its rotation around an unremarkable star, its people going about their daily lives much as they always had. But throughout the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, billions of beings lived with a new understanding of what was possible when someone was willing to stand up and say no. The age of inevitable submission was over. The age of choice had begun, and it had started with a species from a small blue world that had never learned the meaning of the word surrender.